Think you know what's going to happen in the big game? Call it with DraftKings Predictions, a new app where you can make real money predictions on football's biggest game. DraftKings Predictions is new, simple to use, and available in your state. Download now. New DraftKings Predictions customers get up to a $75 first trade bonus with promo code SPOTIFY. DraftKings Predictions is a CFTC registered introducing broker. Event contract trading involves substantial risk of loss. One for new customer. Opt-in required. Non-withdrawable predictions dollars expire in 1 year. Ends February 8th, 2026. Market availability varies. Eligibility restrictions apply. See terms at dkng.co/predictions promo.
Hello and welcome to Haway The Podcast. It's Martin here and you're joining us for another instalment on This Week, where we take a look back at events that happened on this week in the history of Sunderland AFC. And as usual, I've got two people with me here today who are excellent at putting a bit of colour onto the bare facts. So first of all, it's good morning to Andrew Smithson. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, good morning, Martin. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for that. I will do my best to add some more colour.
Well, I think it's nice, isn't it, to do that when you're looking at facts and you're looking at games from years ago that none of us have seen. It's good to get some insight into things and put a little bit of the detail onto some games and some players and some managers that people aren't necessarily that familiar with.
Exactly, and there's always something, isn't there? You might know the bare facts, but when you start digging, there is always like just a nice little juicy tidbit or something that makes you go, oh wow, that's interesting. I wish I'd been there for that, or I'm not sure when else that happened in Sunderland history. So yeah, even when you're reading up about the most boring of games, just there's something about Sunderland, isn't there? There's always something happening.
There certainly is, and I'm a little bit reluctant now because we've mentioned bare facts and juicy tidbits, and we've got to introduce Kelvin Beattie. Good morning, Kelvin.
You stole me line.
That shows that we've been doing these podcasts together for too long, then, Kelvin. If I'm stealing your lines now.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. Juicy tidbits. It's too early in the morning for juicy tidbits. I do like a juicy tidbit, though.
Well, Andrew's promised us some, so we'll have to stay tuned to get those from Andrew. And Andrew, you did leave the listeners with something to ponder over the last few days, didn't you?
I did. I will just warn listeners that the juicy tidbits, you do have to pay an extra subscription for those. I was just teasing, trying to get in some few additional Patreon listeners or what have you. Yes, the quiz question. 12th of February 2005, Marcus Stewart scored a hat-trick against which team, folks? Any guesses?
I remember this game, and it was Watford, wasn't it? It was Watford at the Stadium of Light.
Spot on. It was Watford. You're dead right. Now, there's a bit of context behind this. You might recall, lads, last time we spoke on and on this week, the quiz question was about Darren Byfield, and I'd always had it in my head that towards the end of the 2003-04 season, Mick McCarthy preferred Marcus Stewart in that number 10 role, and didn't really fancy Darren Byfield. But having gone back through the archives and refreshed my memory, seemingly this season where Stewart scores a hat-trick against Watford, prior to that, we had offered Byfield a 2-year contracted extension. So, you know, he was obviously doing better than or impressing the manager more than I thought. It was only because his agent had turned that offer down, wanting more wages, that Byfield decided to move on. He'd been desperate seemingly to sign for us. He claimed it was all down to his agent that he was having to move on. His agent who was getting the stick for this was a fella called Jonathan Barnett of stellar promotions and management. So if you're looking for an agent, that's not the best advert. One of their clients wasn't too happy with old Jonathan there. So he felt he'd been left in limbo. We'd signed Stephen Elliott from Man City at the start of June. Tommy Smith as well. He turned down a contract offer and went to Derby County. So there's all sorts of changes before the 04-05 season. There's also, as there seemed to be always, there was links with a move for David Connolly. So there's a lot of changes happening around Marcus Stewart. A lot of question marks about who is going to be our striker, our number 10 for that season. But it doesn't faze Stewart. He has a great season. We win the title, as you might remember, lads. Marcus Stewart is our top scorer in the league. He gets 16 for us. He gets a hat-trick early on in the season away at Gillingham, for whom Darren Byfield is now playing for. So, Darren Byfield, again, he's left Sunderland, but he did go to another championship club. So, he probably would have been okay if he'd hung around at Sunderland. He scored a few goals for us. He played a few games. Things didn't work out. He moved on. As I say, he's playing against Sunderland when Marcus Stewart gets his hat-trick. We win 4-0. Stephen Elliott gets the other one. And then we come to this February 2005 game at home to Watford. It's another match ball for Marcus Stewart. Chris Brown gets our other goal. And then in the closing stages, Bruce Dyer gets a couple for Watford. And I wonder, Martin, if that's why you remember this game, because Mick McCarthy wasn't best pleased. I mean, a 4-2 win, you'd think would be pretty happy, but he wasn't best pleased with the closing stages and how Sunderland conceded a couple of sloppy goals late on.
I think I remember also, I do remember McCarthy not being happy about it. I remember a couple of bloopers from the Watford goalkeeper. There's a lad called Paul Jones. I think he used to play for Wolves as well. And he always seemed to have a mistake in him. And he did not have a great game on this occasion.
Again, yeah, you're dead right. The goals, the first one was a deep cross from Stephen Elliott. He had a good season, to be fair to him. When he was brought in, maybe people were a bit fearful that he was a little less experienced than Byfield, but Stephen Elliott had a great season. He plays a deep cross from the right for Stewart to nod in at the far post for 1-0. The second one is a penalty after Julio Walker and George McCartney do some of their trademark left-wing combination work. McCartney gets hauled down in the box, so Stewart takes a really good penalty. And I don't know if you remember, lads, but around about that time, Marcus Stewart did seem to be our preferred penalty taker.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
So 2-0 at half-time. The third, it comes in the second half, and this is what you're talking about, Martin. It's a really bad error from the keeper. It's like a long punt upfield. He completely misjudges the bounce of it. It kind of goes over him as he's stretching for it. But to be fair to Stewart, he was a natural finisher. And he reacts to it. He's there at the right place. And although it looks scruffy, he's able to kind of get a touch on the ball, and it almost crawls over the empty line and empty net into the goal. But you've got to give Stewart his credit, because it's a real poacher's finish. Admittedly, being given a big assist by the goalkeeper. But yeah, so that's Stewart. That's his hat-trick. Sunderland's fourth was from close range by Chris Brown. It had come via like a Dean Whitehead corner. And I seem to remember around that time, Chris Brown was breaking into the team. So there's another striking option. Maybe that was another reason why the other players were moving on. Maybe Chris Brown was being readied for a more involved role. But his first few goals for Sunderland were all dead close range.
Yeah.
They were all within the 6-yard box. So there we go. We're 4-0 up. And then these two sloppy goals from Bruce Dyer. Sunderland's defence was really good that season, but these goals that we conceded were poor. Mick McCarthy wasn't happy about them. He felt, if Sunderland are going to do something, they can't switch off in the closing stages of a game, even if they're 4-0 up. I remember at the time him being unhappy, but I did have a little watch of the video highlights last night, lads, before joining you today. And bless him, I watched McCarthy's response again, his reaction. I couldn't take it seriously, lads. Me and my daughter, earlier on in the week, we went to see that Saipan film.
Oh, yeah.
So, of course, now I'm never going to be able to see Mick McCarthy in the same light. I've now got this idea of him as being Steve Coogan and Alan Partridge all rolled into one. So my future comments on Mick McCarthy might be I might take them with a different context going forward. But yeah, there was the quiz question. It was Watford we played, and that whole era. There was a lot of to-ing and fro-ing with our striking options.
There was a lot I like about Ian Stewart, wasn't there? Sorry, Paul Stewart. He scored lots of
Marcus Stewart was pretty good as well.
Marcus Stewart, yeah, I'll get his name right in a minute. Marcus, yeah.
Ross Stewart was all right as well, wasn't he?
Ian Stewart was a good marathon runner. He ran for Scotland. He scored all sorts of different kinds of goals, Stewart, didn't he? I always really liked him, mate. But for some reason, he used to take a little bit of stick at times. But I always really liked him. And I'll tell you, who else I liked was Tommy Smith. But he didn't. Did he play an awful lot with Stewart?
He did a little bit in that first season down the Championship, didn't he? Now, I think there's another bit of context to all of this as well, which might feed into why some people weren't that keen on him originally, because he'd obviously been brought in by Peter Reid, hadn't he, in that Premier League season alongside Torre Andrea Flo. And it was viewed that him and Flo would supplement Phillips and take us, back. We had a couple of indifferent seasons, I guess, under Reid, hadn't we? But sort of bounce us back up into those positions, and he didn't do much at all in that first season with us, did he? When we went down, he was on the transfer list, so the club transfer listed him because they wanted to get a shot of his wages. So he spent actually the vast majority of his time at Sunderland on the transfer list because the club wanted to get his wages off the book, but never actually did. You've got, as Andrew was talking about, the striking options that we had in Byfield and Tommy Smith, who came in that first season down the Championship as well. Kevin Kyle really established himself towards the end of that season, didn't he? And he was getting bids from Crystal Palace, who'd beaten us in the playoffs that season. And he was being talked about as the next big thing. Premier League clubs were after him. Early on in this season, Kyle starts slowly and he suffers, I think it was a hip injury, which ruled him out for a lot of the season. So that Gillingham game that Andrew talked about before, where Stewart got a hat-trick, I'm sure that was the first game Kyle missed that season. Stephen Elliott went up front alongside Stewart, and the two of them kind of hit it off. But even throughout this season, McCarthy, up until the Christmas time, had this habit of taking Stewart off after about an hour, 65 minutes. And you often thought, why is he taking him off? He seemed to just be in this rotation of taking Stewart off and putting somebody else on. And there was that game at Forest that we've talked about before where Stewart is left on, scores a goal in the 90th minute to win us the game. And from there on in, McCarthy didn't tend to take Stewart off very early anymore. He left Stewart on because he'd proven he had a goal in him. And he went on a run that really got us promoted. He scored some very important goals. That one at Wigan later on in the season really stands out as a hugely important goal, which was obviously very early on in that game. So it was quite an interesting. There's a few bits to that striking story, wasn't there? That kind of all moved together. An interesting thing I noted about this Watford game was on the subs bench for Watford, Alex Chamberlain was the sub goalkeeper, and also a player who came off the Watford bench that day is still playing professional football.
Oh,
so you've got Alex Chamberlain, who must be in his 60s now.
Yeah,
it's not alongside somebody who's still playing professional football.
I'd spotted Chamberlain's name on the bench, and I think he was at Watford for quite a while.
He was.
I can't think of who this young whippersnapper was, though.
Ashley Young came off the bench for Watford.
Oh, wow.
And of course, he's still playing for Ipswich this season. So you've got all of these names that we've talked about to varying degrees over these podcasts. So you've got in Sunderland's lineup, you had people like Gary Breen and Dean Whitehead, Steve Caldwell, Stephen Elliott, Marcus Stewart, Julio Arca, all of whom have been retired for a considerable period of time. You've still got Ashley Young there, who's still waving the flag and representing the 2004-2005 Coca-Cola Championship season there. So that's quite nice little side, isn't it?
It's a great spot. That isn't Ashley Young's son also now a pro footballer as well?
There was some controversy, wasn't there? When was it when he was at Everton a season or two ago, and Everton got drawn against the team that Ashley Young's son plays for, and there was a whole kick-off because whoever the manager was at Everton had not picked Ashley Young for the game, and people were saying he should have picked him for sentimental reasons and all that sort of stuff, which you can argue the rights and wrongs of, but
yes, that does ring a bell. But yeah, so basically, the footballers I remember watching as a youth, their kids are now professional footballers. So that's sobering.
Well, I'm sure, without wishing to cast any aspersions at all, I'm sure there's some grandkids of players that Kelvin watched. There's likely to be, won't there? So it's
that'll be a juicy little tidbit, Martin, is it? Is that
that's a whole other podcast, I think, isn't it? Right, we will get started with the show. February the 9th is the day that we are starting this week, and we're going to go all the way back to 1935 as Sunderland beat Leicester 2-0 at Roker Park. Bobby Gurney and Rach Carter got the goals. 1952, Trevor Ford got a hat-trick as Sunderland beat Chelsea 4-1 at Roker Park. Len Shackleton got the other. And in 1957, Colin Granger, the singing winger, made his debut for Sunderland against Spurs at White Hart Lane. We got beat 5-2, but it was 0-0 at half-time. Len Shackleton put us in front on 47, but we kind of collapsed a little bit. Charlie Cannonball Fleming, the confused ostrich, got a goal for us to make it 3-2 in 80 minutes, but yeah, we went down by 5 in the end. 1980. This must have been a good game, Kelvin. I don't know if you remember this one. It was a 5-0 home win over Burnley, and it was Stan Cummins' 12th game for the club. He got 4 of those goals, and Kevin Arnott got the other one to get a pretty convincing win.
He was absolutely on fire that day. When he was in the fettle, Stan Cummins was great. He was a really, really entertaining lad to watch playing. And when he was on, he was really on. And he just was irresistible that day. But I tell you, Kevin Arnott played really well as well. Arnott used to have his radar a little bit. You know, he could just stroll around the pitch, hitting them with passes. You know, they did play quite well together. Them two. It was a good game. It was a good game, and I do remember it. Little Stanley flying around.
And I remember, it must have been a few months ago now, you did a deep dive into the career of Stan Cummins at Sunderland, didn't you? So if anybody wants to look back in the podcast archives, they'll find Kelvin's exceptionally good piece on Stan Cummins a few months ago. 1993, this was a game at Roker Park. We beat Oxford 2-0. Now, I think this was was this Terry Butcher's second home game in charge? I've got a feeling it probably was. It was a nighttime game. And after 5 minutes, an Oxford defender by the name of Mike Ford got a red card for a deliberate handball, which gave us a penalty. And Don Goodman scored that penalty. So we were playing against 10 men for the vast majority of the game. Mickey Gray got a goal in the first half as well. We beat Oxford 2-0. But transpired it was a bit of a case of mistaken identity, and Mike Ford should not have been sent off. It was in fact Andy Melville, who of course was one joined Sunderland, who had committed the handball and kept his mouth shut when the referee sent his mate off. So I'm not sure what the thought process was there, whether he just thought he got away with it or whether he thought he was a better player than Mike Ford, so he'd stay on the pitch for the good of the team. Or whether you can't... Well, I've got a feeling that a suspension for mistaken identity can be rescinded, but then it can't be given to somebody else.
Double jeopardy.
Right.
So whether that, I suspect it was more, I've got away with this one, so we'll crack on. It was the order of the day, but yeah, a memorable game, and obviously Andy Melville went on to have better days at Roker Park over the coming seasons. 2002, we beat Derby 1-0 away at Pride Park, and Al Quinn got the winner on 80 minutes. In 2008, Sunderland beat Wigan 2-0 at the Stadium of Light. Dixon the two who got the first for us, and Daryl Murphy got the second with an absolute screamer. But can you remember who put the pass through to Daryl Murphy to score that goal?
He was a debutant, wasn't he? Hadn't we just signed him in the January window?
We certainly had.
Kelvin, do you want some clues or?
Come on then.
He'd put his guitar down.
Yes.
Andy Reid.
Andy
Well
Reid.
done.
Yeah, he didn't look in the best in the fitness stakes, I guess, is the kind way to explain it when he came onto the pitch. But he had a wonderful left foot, didn't he?
Oh, he did, and he loved to pull the strings in midfield there, Martin.
Very good. Very good. I tell you what, Martin, you're saying he didn't look to have been in the best shape. I think there was around about 10,000 fans in the stands who, when he went on, thought, there's a chance for me yet. I might still get to pull on the red and white stripes for the lads.
Well, it really was a sort of a throwback to a different era, wasn't it? When you see somebody who isn't, football today, I know you sound like a bloody get me soapbox now, but it's so athletic, isn't it? So strong, athletic, and there's so much in the small percentages, and I just don't think Andy Reid would get a look in a Premier League club,
no,
if he wasn't completely fit. And we saw him, didn't he? Especially when C. Bruce's first season, he got himself into absolutely fantastic shape, and he played brilliantly. But his weight could fluctuate, I guess, is the nice way of saying it. And he arrived at the Stadium of Light. And it's interesting as well that Roy Keane, who was a manager and a character who you wouldn't expect to really let that sort of stuff go, he was quite happy to put Andy Reid on the pitch there. Former Irish teammate. He knew what he could produce. And again, he produced a fantastically good pass for Daryl Murphy. And it was brilliant finish by Murphy as well, by the way. Take nothing away from that. But the pass and the finish as a combination is probably one of the best goals at the Stadium of Light in terms of quality, because it was superb on both counts.
There's a great top 10 pod there, I think, isn't there, in the top 10 most out of shape players that
I tell you what, as well, he is the nerve of me saying, "Oh yeah, players out of shape and what have you." I bet if you put me next to them on like a five-a-side court, they would absolutely run rings around me. They would make me look like just decrepit in comparison. So Martin's right. It in a game of fine margins, it's hard that sometimes you look at some players and think they're getting away with it, but their general fitness must have still been on another planet to an ordinary folk. I'm assuming.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? There must be some different levels to it, but It's a skill as well, isn't it? It's just the ability that they've got. I think if Andy Reid had been a clogger of a player, he doesn't succeed with the physique. It's because he was such a talented footballer. You could get away with a little bit, I guess, couldn't you? But it's yes.
I know it's a cliche, Martin, but he was a lad, wasn't he, that played the game in his own time. He always looked like he had a bit of time, and there's a real that in itself, I think, is a skill. To look like you're just going to do it all in your own time anyway. It doesn't matter what's going on round about you. Kevin Arnott was like that as well. He just did everything in his own time, and those players were great to watch. But I don't think we get them. I think you're right. I think they'd really struggle to survive in today's game.
Well, it's much more of a team game now, isn't it? Where the 11 players on the pitch are all genuinely working together, and that's where the best team succeeds. And you haven't got as much room for that individuality in those maverick players who'll just go and do what they want, I guess. But
we need a bit less of this team shite.
I tell you what, Kelvin, you've likened him there to Kevin Arnott. I wish I'd seen him play, because the way you talk about him just makes him sound like an amazing player. As for Reid, one thing I will say about him, apparently people who met him, and whenever I hear him on the radio as a summariser, apparently he's an absolutely lovely fella. He always comes across well on the radio. I get the impression, again, another thing that's unlike a lot of typical footballers now, I think he had a lot of interests away from the game. He was a talented guitar player and what have you. Sounds like quite a fascinating bloke, you know. But in football terms, he could do some magic stuff, and that pass was awesome. Daryl Murphy's another one I think at some point we could probably have a big talk about, because sometimes he could be a bit of a figure of fun and a bit lightweight. And then other times, he could be handy for us. He scored a couple of decent goals for us.
I was just going to say that, Andrew. He scored some cracking goals, didn't he? And I always thought he was quite strong on the ball. You know, he had a burst and was quite strong on the ball. I used to quite like him.
He's an interesting one, isn't he? Because you rightly say at Sunderland, he had a reputation. Even he could score some great goals and put in some good performances, but he also had a little bit of a reputation of being a bit lightweight, get knocked off the ball, didn't put himself about enough. Fast forward after he left Sunderland a few years, and he had a reputation at the championship level of being a bit of a battering ram. Centre forward. I remember him playing against us. Was it for Forest? I can't remember who he was.
I think he played for Forest and scored against us, I think.
And now that was the season that we went down to the Championship before we got down to League One. He looked as strong as an ox, and he absolutely dominated the defenders on that occasion. So he obviously added something to his game as he progressed and got a little bit older.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That matches in with my memories of him.
Anyway, Andy Reid apparently is still at Forest as a youth team coach, as well as doing other bits and pieces on the TV. We will take a very short break there, and we'll be back after these couple of ads.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Welcome back to Haway The Podcast for the latest episode of On This Week. And February the 10th is the date that we're going to go into now. In 1894, Sunderland played Aston Villa in the FA Cup second round at Newcastle Road Ground. We drew 2-2. James Gillespie and Hughie Wilson with the goals for us. It was notable as well because that was record gate receipts for the club at the time. 960 quid was taken over the gate on that occasion. 1912. This is the first time that two Sunderland players played for England in the same game. So Jackie Mordew and George Holly were both called up to play for England in the international against Ireland in Dublin. George Holly got a goal in the 6-1 win. But of course, in those days, the club games went on as well. So Sunderland were in action against Aston Villa at Roker Park. And without Jackie Mordew and George Holly, we managed to get a 2-2 draw against Aston Villa. Harry Lowe got our two goals, and they came in the middle of Clem Stevenson's opener for Villa and Horace Henschel's equaliser on 80 minutes. You don't get many players called Horace now, do you? And the world is a poorer place for us. 1979, we drew 3-3 at Upton Park against West Ham. Bob Lee got one of our goals and Will Ostrom got two. Pop Robson was on the score sheet for West Ham. Now, 1996 on February the 10th, this is the day that my football dreams died. Well, my dreams of becoming a footballer died because Michael Bridges came on as a substitute against Port Vale in a nighttime game at Roker Park. And Michael Bridges was the first player who I saw play for us who was younger than me. And I thought, that's a sign. That's a sign that it ain't going to happen. But Mickey Bridges came on, danced around a few people. He actually had a very good game off the bench. He came on sub for Phil Gray, but we drew 0-0 on that evening. 2007, Sunderland played a game away at Plymouth Argyle, and Anthony Stokes got his first goal for the club. 2018, on February the 10th, this was the 3-3 draw at Bristol City. I don't know if you remember that. It wasn't really a highlight. It was a not-so-low light of that championship season under Chris Coleman. But we were 3-0 down very early on. We came back thanks to two own goals, one of which was in the very last minute in the goal from Aidan McGeady. But Lee Johnson was the manager of Bristol City that day, which I had not really joined the dots on. But there you go. That was Lee Johnson versus Chris Coleman. And in 2024, so just a couple of years ago, Romain Mundle made his debut in a 3-1 win at the Stadium of Light against Plymouth Argyle. Pierre Ekwar, Jack Clark and Job got the goals, and I think that was a rare highlight for Mick Beale in his tenure as manager of the club. February the 11th, 1933, we played Blackburn at Roker Park, beat them 4-2. Bert Davis got a hat-trick and Bobby Kearney got one. 1946, on February the 11th, Ian Porterfield was born in Dunfermline. 1967, we had another draw at West Ham. We seemed to play West Ham at Upton Park around this time of the year. It was a 2-2 draw on this occasion. George Mulhall and Neil Martin got the goals for us. Jimmy Montgomery saved a penalty from Jeff Hurst. So this is the season after West Ham won the World Cup, allegedly. Monty saved a penalty from Jeff Hurst before half-time on 38 minutes, but Hurst had the last laugh. He equalised on 89. 1977, Mel Holden scored a goal against Bristol City, which ended a barren run of 1,020 minutes for Sunderland without a goal. 2022, on February the 11th, Alex Neil was appointed as Sunderland manager. And on the same day in 2023, Tony Mowbray's Sunderland beat Paul Ince's Reading 1-0. Patrick Roberts got the goal. Isaac Lahadji made his debut off the bench.
Hey.
I think Paul Ince wasn't very pleased after the game. I think he thought Reading deserved something out of the game, and we didn't. But he was talking nonsense. Now, for our first deep dive today, we are going to go back to February the 9th. And 1968, Kelvin, this follows on from your story last week, doesn't it? You covered Ian McColl's departure from the club last week. And this, I guess, is part 2 of that story.
It is. It felt worth sort of just following it up. given the characters involved and some of the things that went on around it. I mean, the just to retrace steps a little bit, McColl as manager, the team had no victories for 11 games, I think. And we went off to play Sheffield Wednesday at Hillsborough. And Alan Brown, our former manager, was the manager of Sheffield Wednesday.
And Kelvin, sorry, Kelvin, just to interrupt there, because for people who don't know that story, Alan Brown obviously been in charge of Sunderland previously, got us back up to the First Division. After we got up to the First Division, he left under a bit of a cloud to go to Sheffield Wednesday. And there was obviously a whole history and story there to this at this point, wasn't there?
Well, listen, because we have talked about that before. It was a very odd occurrence to, he'd been with the club from 1957. They appointed him after the Bank of England, Mr. Smith scandal. Sid Collins, the chairman, appointed him. He was the man of choice because of his character and his formidable reputation for honesty and straight dealing. That was the kind of character Brown was. His word was law. He wasn't a particularly easy fella to be around if you had a disagreement with him. But he certainly moved the club on from the Bank of England scandal, which was one of the things the board wanted him to do. And he was the manager when we went down for the first time, but the club was an absolute mess. And then he eventually got we back up after 2 near misses. He gets we back up in 63, 64. Leeds are the champions. We come in second behind Leeds, Don Revy's Leeds. We've had a great tussle with them all through that season, and up we go to much excitement. And then I think there was just about 3 weeks of the new season to go, and he's in dispute with the club behind the scenes, and he walks. The common perception is that was about a house, a clubhouse that he lived in, and that he wanted to buy. But there was another little piece to that's dropped into place for me anyway. It wasn't just about the house. He did want to buy that house. He'd asked the club if he could buy it. The club had let some of the senior players. It wasn't an unusual thing. Some of the senior players had bought their houses. And it was quite a good deal because what the common practice was, the players bought the houses at the price that the club originally paid for them.
Yeah.
And what the players had to do was pay the legal fees. And then, they got their houses. But for some reason, the board wouldn't let Brown buy his house. And at the same time, or almost at the same time, there was a dispute between Brown and the board about a £1,000 promotion bonus that was paid to all the players, and that Brown himself thought he should have had, but the club said no.
Yeah.
So the two things kind of collided, and Brown, being the kind of character that he was, said, "No, I'm not having this." And he went back to Sheffield Wednesday. He'd been there as a coach for about 3.5 years before he took the manager's job at Burnley. And he had a really, really good reputation at Sheffield. He'd done a lot of good work, was highly thought of. And Sheffield themselves were mired in a match-fixing scandal. And their manager, I think he played at Spurs, Viv Buckingham. I think he was called. He left in the middle of this investigation and left Sheffield without a manager. And Brown just thought, right, I'll get myself off to Sheffield where I've been before. where I know I'm appreciated. So off he went and left the club, left the board with a real problem. I think I'm sort of gonna come back to that moment. It's a real moment in our history that we missed. It's a sliding door moment. That team that came up in 63, 64 and Brown were right on the cusp of their skills, their performances. You really felt, from speaking to people that were watching the team at the time, like it was launchpad stuff, and a bit like if you look at what happened to Leeds under Don Revie, there's no reason not to think that couldn't have happened to Sunderland, because Revie's Leeds could never beat Sunderland that season. They never beat them that season. We were every bit as good as them that season when you look at results, and what have you. And you might have expected, and I know fans that were watching the team at that time expected us to take the first division, take the top tier, and to move forward under Brown. He was a real innovative coach, and a lad whose stock in football was really high. And we had a team, that could do damage. We had a team that there was expectations that all that was going to happen was Brown would build. He would build on that team. It was a real sliding door moment for the club, and the fallout. Reading behind all that there does seem to have been a bit of brinkmanship going on with the board, with Sid Collins, the chairman, a little bit of brinkmanship. Brown wasn't always easy to be around. And the more I've read about that, the more I think, he'd be a hard guy to sort of fall out with, it would be his way or the highway, kind of seemed to be where he was at. But all the things that he'd done, the team, things like his influence throughout the club. He did for us what he did at Burnley as well, the Cleedon training base. He revolutionised training, when he came, the Sunderland team was still running around the track at Roker Park and sprinting up and down the steps at the Roker end. That's what training was, an occasional jog along the beach. He revolutionised all of that, put into place the training base. He persuaded the club to buy some land off a local farmer at Cleedon there. And, it was a fantastic sort of development for the club and for the players, and youth players as well. He brought Charlie Ferguson with him, and put a real emphasis on attracting and sourcing and finding youth players, as well as using Ferguson's network and his own contacts to source players to buy, because we always go on about Brown and his youth players, but the players that he bought some fantastic players at the club with the money that he was given to spend that first time around. Hurd, Crossan, Mulhall, Charlie Hurley, the fantastic players. Second time around, he did bring Joe Baker, who wasn't a great success. Joe Baker, he didn't do too badly in the second division, but not great in the first division. But he did buy Dick Malone and David Watson. Now nobody's going to argue with them as purchases for a club, the second time around. But we missed an opportunity in 63, 64, 64, 65. It was a sliding door moment. If Sid Collins and the board were engaged in a bit of brinkmanship, he took them on and, left them and left the club high and dry. One of the things to bear in mind there is he's a Corbridge lad, Alan Brown. He's from Corbridge. Yeah. And Sunderland were his team. as a lad. So it must have taken quite a bit for him to sort of walk, but he was never slow in making decisions, and he would make difficult decisions and just crack on with it. That seemed to be his ilk. And off he went to Sheffield Wednesday. But there was a sense, I'm guessing, for him of unfinished business. And, there's an old adage, isn't there? You should never go back. And he did come back. I always wonder that game, that McColl, Sunderland won that game against Sheffield Wednesday. And McColl ended, I think we hadn't won for 11 games or something. And they win the game with a goal from Ralph Brand. They get home, they get back to the North East, and on the Monday morning, McColl's sacked by Sid Collins and the vice chair, who was a lad called Cook, I think, sacked him on the Monday morning, but made no announcement. And McColl was asked by the press what was going on. He didn't say anything. He just left. And famously, his wife, Ian McColl's wife, when was asked by the press what was going on, and she said, "Well, it's good news for me." Hopefully he's going to walk away from football. And he did. Ian McColl did, as I said last week. But the story there for me was Alan Brown tapped up at that game. Sunderland are playing Sheffield at Hillsborough. It just seems too much of a coincidence to me that that they're playing. Sheffield lose the game, but the next thing is it's Alan Brown who's coming in now. McColl didn't comment straight away, and the board didn't say anything about who was coming in. But when he was asked later on, I think he was at his home, and he was asked, McColl, what had happened, and he said, "Well, I've been relieved of my duties from this moment, and I can tell you that Alan Brown will be taken over." So an unusual situation where the manager that sacked makes the announcement.
Announces his replacement, yeah.
But he seems to have sent both the Sunderland board and the Sheffield board into a bit of a spin, because the Sheffield chairman had to then make a statement, and all he would say was, "We're having our usual board meeting tonight, Monday evening, and there'll be no announcement about this. I haven't seen Mr. Brown today," was what he said. The reason why he hadn't seen him was Alan Brown was on the road to Sunderland, and I believe he was spotted in Sunderland sort of later on that day. So Brownie comes in. His former players all called him the Bomber. And the crack was the Bomber was back. And I can remember as a young fan saying that, older boys saying this to me, "Oh, the Bomber's back, the Bomber's back." Because I had started supporting Sunderland during the McColl era. So I'd only heard about Alan Brown. I had never experienced him as a fan and him as a manager. But he comes back. He makes a canny fist of things, although he loses the first 4 games. It's interesting. People like Charlie Hurley and Lenny Ashurst, had a lot of respect for Alan Brown. He's the players who he brought to the club and gave debuts to, young players, had a lot of respect for him. And when he came back, I think that respect was still there. But there was people like Lenny Ashurst said, the club had changed so much in the time that he'd been away, and that Ashurst, in hindsight, felt that Brown hadn't appreciated the deterioration in the squad, and the fact that some of these older players like Ashurst, Hurley, Hurd, Mulhall, they were all getting on, and they had, things like injuries and stuff like that were beginning to impact on some of these lads as well. There was also no money, and some young players like Colin Suggett were sold, and the money wasn't necessarily invested particularly well. So he loses the first 4 games, but he does pull it around. And Sunderland finished, I think it was 15th that season. And in a way, and I can sort of remember this, feeling that, he's done well there. And we finished the season quite well. And you're thinking, this lad's, I was just a young fan, but I can remember other people as well thinking, wow, the Bomber's going to do it. I'd never met the boy from Adam, but as a young lad, I was always saying, the Bombers were manager now, and I like it just seemed like a great nickname for a manager to me, so, but he's bear in mind, we've got a character here. He's an uncompromising character. He's got this strong Christian faith. He's got this moral fortitude that he's known for. But he definitely had an ability to rub people up the wrong way. And he kowtowed to very few people, Alan Brown, so you've got a real character there, I think, might be the right way of putting it. He'd done well at Sheffield Wednesday. He'd taken a pretty average team, kept them in the top tier, sorted out the club was cleansed from top to bottom with all the poor practices and the match fixing and stuff like that. He did that at Burnley, and he did it at Sunderland. He cleared out all that practice and wouldn't have it around him. He wouldn't pay things like bonuses to, if Sunderland and Burnley, and he did the same at Sheffield Wednesday, if they went and signed a player and their parents said, what about a wee bonus for him signing? He'd say, nah. We don't do that. That's not what we're about. It's not what we're going to be doing. If you're not happy, off you go. That was the kind of fella that he was. It seems strange that saying that and then thinking that the £1,000 promotion bonus and the purchase of the house was the issue that moved him off. But it seemed to be common practice and legal. I don't think they were flouting any rules by doing that. Is my reading of that. He comes back, and I can remember a lot of fans at the time feeling quite good about that because the club had been a mess. But I can also remember some fans, older fans, I used to love a crack with the older boys, and some of them saying, it's, I think there was a feeling that sometimes the football could be a bit regimented, and lacked a bit of imagination, and that some of the younger players that we had, I remember one guy in particular, he loved the bones of Dennis Stewart and Billy Hughes. And I remember him saying, watch Brownie, he'll have them. There'll be bloody fullbacks by the time he finished, and so there was always people, some of the people some of the time, but never all of the people. There were people that had some qualms and some concerns about him coming back. He does come back though, and I misspoke last week about something. I must put that right. Somebody let me know that I'd made an error. I meant to
in
mention
the sauna.
that.
Was this in the sauna, Kelvin, or was this?
I wasn't in the sauna. I've been away all week. It was a text message. But I think he was in the sauna texting me, if that's any. Where are you? I wanted to speak to you about this, you bugger, So I said that Ian McColl had spent some of the Jim Baxter money on Kelvin Palmer, and that he'd spent 70,000 on Kelvin Palmer. It wasn't actually Ian McColl who bought Kelvin Palmer. That was one of Alan Brown's first buys, was Kelvin Palmer from Stoke, and he was quite. You could see when you look at Palmer's CV, you could see what Brown was thinking there, that he definitely needed a little bit of help. There, Palmer was he had a bit of versatility about him. I think he'd be about 28 when he came to the club, so he wasn't a young player. He had a bit of experience, bit of versatility. He could play in midfield. He could play fullback. He was a player that earned £70,000 in those days was a sizable fee for a player. Yeah. So Palmer was Brown's first buy, but Brown being Brown, Palmer didn't play too many games because he had a fallout with Brown, and this was. Brown's got these fallouts all over his history. Didn't matter where he was. He didn't like drink, Brown. He didn't agree with players getting up to all sorts of antics like that. God knows what he would have made of the McColl era. Well, he wouldn't have stood for it. He wouldn't have had it. They went to Stoke for a game, and Palmer had signed, and that was Palmer's previous club. And he played quite a few games for Stoke. And as was the tradition, if you want, of matches away from home, and when they stayed overnight, they went to the pitches. And Billy Elliott, who we're talking about, Billy Elliott was the coach, and he escorted the lads to the pitches to make sure there was no shenanigans. But what they went to see was the sound of music. And apparently every player had seen this film loads of times before. And Kelvin Palmer, because he was in his hometown, I think he still had relatives that lived in the area. He sat through the first 5 minutes and then got up and walked out and went to see his relatives. Big fallout with Brown, and he never played another game for the club. That was him done. And do you know, I think he was at the club for about 2 years. He went away and played on loan in South Africa, and when you fell out with Brown, it was there wasn't any way back. Now, Palmer had that within his CV. He'd fallen out at one of the reasons he transferred from Stoke was a fallout with. It was actually Morris Setters who he fell out.
Oh,
with.
really?
So Morris Setters was Mick McCarthy's right hand man.
Well,
wasn't he,
with Jack Charlton as well.
Jackie Charlton. Sorry, just thinking about what you were talking about earlier with Keane and McCarthy and the Irish. Anyway, I digress. But Palmer's situation. Palmer wasn't the only player that fell foul of Brown. Ian Portfield infamously did, and unfortunately, one of my older friends used to say about Brown, he actually liked him, but he would say, you know what, he'd cut his nose off to spite his face if he thought he was right. And what he did was, there was a fallout with Porterfield, which the trigger appears to have been, I think we've talked about this before, but it's really saying what I'm trying to describe here is quite complex character, that Alan Brown was, you know. What the trigger appears to have been Porterfield questioning formation and tactics on a pre-season tour. And I think I've said that. I think I've quoted that when I was talking about Ian Porterfield. But when you delve into that a little bit more, there was an incident at the Christmas before the pre-season tour, in that season prior to that tour, where Porterfield had quite a big Christmas party at his house, and Brown frowned upon that kind of thing. Didn't think that kind of thing was right. And whether there'd been a cast iron rule, you know, had all the players been told you weren't allowed to do that, I don't know. But I know that Porterfield viewed what he did in his own house, and you know, as long as it didn't affect his football, his game, Porterfield viewed that as his business. And he was quite Porterfield himself was an intelligent, assertive kind of lad, even as a young lad. You know, he wouldn't have been cowed by somebody cutting across his personal boundaries, you know. So I think that there'd already been something there between them. And then this incident happens on the pre-season tour. And if you look at Ian Porterfield's career history, you'll see that 69-70, he just seems to disappear. You'd think he'd been injured for a season. He wasn't. He almost packed the game in because he couldn't. Brown totally blackballed him. And not only that, when Porterfield had put a transfer request in, because he really couldn't see a way forward and the season was just going on and on, he put a transfer request in. Brown made sure that anybody that came looking was given the brush off. And, it was a hell of a story, a hell of a thing to happen to a player. Porterfield almost packed the game in, and he was, by his own volition, admits that his mental health wasn't great during that period, you know. Eventually, it's Brown that Brown sends him a letter and invites him to come in and see him. And I think to make his apologies for everything that he's done wrong, that's Porterfield, and Porterfield will get back in the first team. Unfortunately, by that point, we're relegated 69-70. We were crying out for a bit of creativity. And, you know, 69-70, he takes Sunderland. He's the manager of Sunderland's second relegation. He's already managed the first one. He manages the second one and takes it down. It was a terrible season that really tested your resolve to keep going, you know, and to keep watching. And terrible in the sense as well, the frustration of seeing these good young players. There were good young players at the club. You could see, I know I'm always saying this, we were only 2 players away. Go on, I'll say it again. We weren't. We were in a bigger mess than that. But you could see good young players were at the club. What I thought we lacked, and what a lot of people would probably agree with, a lot wiser people than me who were around at the time, what we didn't have was the experienced players to help them young players through. In the second division then, it was a shock to the system, you know, the when you're on about the game's changed so much and all the players are athletes now. Every week you turned up for games there and they didn't look like athletes, some of these lads, but they just kicked anything that moved, you know. There were cloggers in every team, and young boys like Chewett and Hughes, Bobby Kerr, you know, were just getting battered every week. You know, Bobby Park, great young player, Bobby Park comes into the team. Fantastic young player, but was just getting battered every week off these cloggers that every team had. What I will say to you is, apart from Lenny Ashurst, we didn't seem to have any cloggers. We looked like a team of blooming artisans, at times. You look at all them, even the big lads were like football, like Cissou and, Flynn doing his wing and stuff. Yeah, thinking, I wish somebody would just clog that lovely little midfield player that's playing for the opposition today, It was weird. It was a horrible season, and we went down. He took us down. I don't know that his job was particularly under threat. I think the club were really hard up, and I think the World Cup in '66 had really, in many respects, exhausted were resources in many respects. We spent a lot of money on the ground. We spent a lot of, comparatively speaking, a lot of money on the infrastructure to get the World Cup there. Sid Collins was the driving force behind that. I don't know if you sort of know the story. He was on the FA Council and the selection committee. The chairman was a guy called Joe Mears, the Chelsea chairman. And he died. He passed away sort of literally days before the World Cup started, and Sid Collins had to step into that, and he did. He was loving it. He was the guy when, if you look at the 1966 World Cup and the Queen being introduced to the West Germany England team, it's Sid Collins that's introducing that team. That's introducing the Queen to the team. Collins steps into that. He's a fantastic ascent, Sid Collins. His story's an amazing one. There's a lot in his story as well. But I imagine that the eyes are on the World Cup, and it's part of the reason why the McColl era causes such mayhem. And part of the after effect of that is, what Alan Brown comes into and what he's left to pick up is not a lot. And that was people like Hurley and Ashurst both talk about that. The club wasn't the same when Brown, the club that Brown had left was not the club. The club that Brown came back to was not the club that Brown had left. And there were real problems. We go down. It's his second relegation. Unfortunately, Brown has that on his CV. In the meantime, we're selling some of our jewels. Colin Suggett was sold. I've spoken before about that. These great young players, Colin Suggett, Colin Todd, fantastic, world-class players, with Billy Hughes, Bobby Kerr, Dennis Stewart was starting to hit his straps. You could see what a great player Stewart was going to be. He was electric when he took off. He could come down either flank. He could play up the middle. Stewart, he was a fantastic player, and Hughesy backing him up as well. Hughesy himself was electric when he got going. So with these fantastic young players, that Brown had a hand in bringing to the club. He didn't give them all debuts, but he certainly had a hand. And then we had another batch, because remember, we were winning FA Youth Cup finals. We were getting with 3 FA Youth Cup finals on our CV from 66 till 69, and some cracking young players coming through. So he has a hand in all of that, a major hand in bringing those players through, and we shouldn't use track of that. It would be wrong to sort of lose that. The other thing he does, although he shifts on some of McColl's players, like Butler and Cannell, the Brand, Ralphie Brand, he keeps one of the lads that he does keep, and it was one of McColl's last buys, was Gordon Harris. Now, Gordon Harris had played at Burnley, and Brown knew him and knew of him and knew the kind of character he was. Gordon Harris was, the nickname for him was Colonel Harris. You know, he was a balding when you're on about, it probably looked like he could have lost a pound or two. A balding ex-England international who was a flyer when he played for England on the left wing, but he gravitated further and further south, as they say, you know, into a midfield player. But he was a canny footballer. I came on to him. The more I saw Harris play, the more I appreciated what he brought to the team. But I could be quite scathing about him initially when I first saw him play. But Brown took him as a McColl buy and kept him in the team and tried to use him as that experienced head for the team. We go down, and I was quite. I wasn't. It had been a dreadful season, but there was an element, and there were certainly other people like me that would say, we need that. We need to go take that step back, go down to the second division, and let Brown build way again. He can do it. He's done it once. He can do it again. Let's take that and come again at this. But it just never quite. It never happened for a variety of. There were a number of happenstances. You know, there were key players that got injured. Bobby Park, a lovely young player. He was heading for Scottish international cap. He gets injured in the first game of, I think it's 71-72 season. Martin Harvey, part of the experienced squad, and a lad that was just really starting to hit his, I thought that season, 71-72, he was, I honestly thought that was his best season for us. And he was playing at the back, and played some games alongside Toto, and he was fantastic. He was a great reader of the game, Harvey, and could play football as well, you know. And he got injured just coming in towards the end of that season. We'd been up there with the pack for most of the season, but I think Harvey's injury and the fact that we sold Todd in February of that season, and it felt like we had to, that they were key to what happened that season. We didn't fall away. We stayed where we were. We were fourth or fifth for, you know, roundabout for most of that season, and we never kicked on. He did buy Dick Malone and Davy Watson, but he was playing, everybody just about knows he was playing Davy Watson up front. But even he allegedly, and I always remember, I spoke with a young lad who got his chance under Brown, Chico Hamilton once. I remember talking to him and said that, you know, Billy Elliott moved Dave Watson back to centre-half, and Bob Stokoe had the good sense to keep him there. And he said, no, I remember Alan Brown telling me that Dave Watson would play centre-half for England. So as an old centre-half himself, which is what Brown was, you know, I think he'd already picked that, you know, when he got the chance, he would move Watson back, but he wasn't there long enough to do that, because having had 71-72 and going close, 72-73 season starts, and there's just a malaise, you know, there's nothing happening. You've got these players and you can see that they're good players, but the ingredient, the magic, you know, that X factor, it's just not there, and we're in trouble. We're heading in the wrong direction, and the club pulls the pin, and he actually, there's always he didn't get sacked, Alan Brown. He actually went and spoke to the board about things and said, I don't know whether I should resign here. Now, my understanding is he spoke to the board and they asked him to stay on, and then he went back a couple of weeks later and said, it's not happening. And the board relieved him of his duties, but I think he'd already offered to go. I think he knew that things weren't right and that maybe taken the team as far as he could. And the rest, as they say, is history that season, 72, 73. I feel like Brown deserves his place, I mean, one observation might be that he was involved in two of the best teams. He had a major hand in two of the best teams ever to wear our colours, the 63-64 squad, and the 72-73 team. 8 of those lads, 6 of them were young players that came through at the club, whilst he was a major force at the club. And 2 of them, 3 of them actually, if you consider 2 of them, Dick Malone and Dave Watson, were his boys. So he deserves his place in our history and deserves the credit for that. But there's no doubt he was a Marmite character, and no doubt a difficult character to be around at times. But Alan Brown, the bomber.
The bomber is back. And he's certainly, Andrew, a manager who, as Kelvin says, deserves his place in Sunderland history and to be well thought of in Sunderland history.
Exactly. He had, he had 2 spells at the club and left a lasting impression on not just the players, but the club as a whole. Kelvin mentioned there that he was integral to setting up specialised training facilities at Clevedon. I think he was a huge driver behind the construction of the training ground at Washington as well during his second spell. He was heavily involved in that, and there's some fantastic photos from the early days of the Washington complex where he's carrying out all of these wonderful and bizarre training methods. That was really something he was seen as can't think of the term, but he was very forward-thinking in his training.
Yeah, quite an innovative football coach, wasn't he?
Exactly, and that had a bearing on some of his players when they became managers. Brian Clough is the famous one there. So he was a fascinating character. I think a lot of his players had respect for him and a fondness for him, but yet could be wary of him. I remember there was players felt that the disciplinarian side of him was very apparent. There was players who felt as if they couldn't express themselves personally. They couldn't grow a beard, for example, because Alan Brown didn't like that. Bobby Kerr, to this day, won't wear jeans because Alan Brown wasn't a fan of players in denim for some reason. I don't know what his issue was, but he did rule the roost, and I could see why somebody like Porterfield might be in 2 minds, thinking, well, okay, I respect you as a manager, but you don't get to make decisions on me as a person in my home and in my private life. So there's all of these complex feelings around him, a fascinating character. I think it says a lot that prior to him playing, he had a spell as a police officer that clearly led, and his religious background clearly led to him having a very clear sense of what was right and wrong. And the Calvin Palmer story you touched on, Kelvin, Calvin Palmer fascinates me And the reasons why Brown brought him in, I'm always a little bit confused about, because yes, as a player, he had a bit of know-how and he was a good player. He cost a lot of money for us. But seemingly he was always known as a bit of a alternative personality.
Correct.
Somebody Brown, you would assume, wouldn't see eye to eye with. And right from the start, they bickered. And you talked about his eventual departure, and there was an issue over a club trip to a cinema. Well, Palmer had form for that, because I remember reading about a story when he just signed, and the club all went on an away trip, and he just got up and wandered off out because he didn't like the film that was being seen. Now, at that point, he was suspended for a short period. So there was always concerns that those two didn't rub along together. So a fascinating period. And I can understand why, for a fan such as yourself, there was a big culture change from Ian McColl's era and allegations of the players being some players could be unprofessional, to then go in the complete other way, where players felt as if they couldn't, they couldn't stop up after their bedtime without getting told off by the boss. Very, very big shift in attitudes around that time at the club.
Your point about his influence over coaches, you mentioned Brian Clough. I'll throw another couple of names that were heavily influenced by him. Laurie McMenemy and Howard Wilkinson.
You're not doing him any favours bringing those two up, Kelvin.
Both, I think Sheffield Wednesday days, they were both coaches at Sheffield Wednesday when he was there. And coaches like Ian Porterfield, for all he had his difficulties with him, Ian Porterfield as a coach and manager cited Brown's influence with some things. Lenny Ashurst was a big fan. There were a number of his ex-players who would say that he definitely offered them something in terms of how to be a coach and how to be a good coach. And even if some of that was about, I'm going to take that bit, but I'm not going to do, the rigidity of thinking the team versus individuality seemed to always be around with Brown. He wasn't. He if you looked at his teams, although there were players with great skill, there were some great players, some really skillful players in his teams. By and large, what you would say was he liked the team. He liked 11 players, not one or two stars, and the rest sort of making it up. He went for a team game, and who's to say that he wasn't right? What I believe, I'm finishing where I started. The 63-64 going into 64-65, when Mr. That to me looks like a major sliding door moment and a miss, a big miss for us there. Who knows what might have happened?
It's interesting what you say, Kelvin, about his influence on those players who subsequently went on to be managers. And you've talked about Porterfield not necessarily rubbing along with him because of Porterfield's personality at that time. I was doing a piece for the website, which went out last week, about the candidates to replace Malcolm Crosby when Terry Butcher got the job. And there was a whole newspaper writing about different managers who were available and who the club might fancy and who they might go for. And Ian Porterfield was managing Chelsea, and he was going through a little bit of a tough time at Chelsea. So there was a school of thought that Porterfield would be available and would jump at taking over at Sunderland. But the comment was that Porterfield's dourness was held against him in the boardroom at Sunderland. And it kind of contradicts the personality that you get from the 70s as a player. But as you say, a lot of those players who played under Alan Brown kind of took that way of managing into their managerial careers. So when Porterfield became a manager, perhaps he was a little bit more regimented, a little bit more strict, a little bit more dour than he otherwise would have been if he hadn't had that influence of Alan Brown in the early 70s. So it's quite an interesting influence, isn't it, to have on those players? But Brian Clough wasn't like that. You wouldn't call Brian Clough a dour personality as a manager, would you? So it can go both ways. But Brian Clough, as Andrew says, always said he was so heavily influenced by Alan Brown as a football manager.
Definitely.
As a character and as a man and as an influence on Sunderland, Alan Brown is huge. He's a huge part of our history. And I will say, for all there's question marks around him, and particularly the second time when he offered to resign and then was relieved of his duties, I think in both instances of him being appointed, you can see exactly why he was the right man at the time, because he twice came into a club that were in real financial issues and had real concerns about player behaviour. And his strengths were moulding and coaching young players, not just into talented footballers, but into the type of men that he felt was the right way to go about things. There's sometimes there's managers, and you think, well, I'm not really sure what they were trying to achieve. I'm not really sure whether they stamped their character on the club. But Alan Brown, even myself, I never was around to see his teams play, but there's no doubt as to how he was as an individual. And the fact that we're talking about it over 50 years later speaks a lot to his character and his management. So he's a big figure in Sunderland history.
He certainly is. We will take a very short break there while we ponder on how Alan Brown would have managed Andy Reid to join a couple of bits up of today's podcast, and we'll be back after a couple of ads.
Whether your business has 6 floors or 6 employees, Walmart Business has everything you need to save time, money, and hassle. You can restock your break room with bulk ordering or bulk up your ordering team with shared payments. And you can get it all delivered straight to your business's door, whether that's on Wall Street or Main Street. Walmart Business. It's the Walmart you love, now for your business. Learn more at business.walmart.com.
Every sip of Coca-Cola brings you closer to the excitement of the FIFA World Cup 26. Because nothing compares to the joy. So grab a Coke and drink in the FIFA World Cup 26. No purchase necessary. 13 plus in 50 U.S. states and D.C. with a web-enabled device. Ends March 1st with 8 entry periods. Rules at cokeurl.com/soccerrules.
Welcome back to Haway The Podcast for another episode on this week. And you join us as we delve into February the 12th. Now, 1921 at Villa Park. Sunderland beat Aston Villa 5-1. Bobby Marshall got 2 goals. Charlie Buchan got 2 goals. And Aston Villa gave us a goal, a contributing own goal to that scoreline. And we ran out 5-1 winners. Now, 1972, we were talking about Alan Brown just before the break, and Alan Brown's Sunderland side took on Oxford United at Roker Park, and he steered the lads to a 3-0 win. 2 goals from Dennis Stewart, and a goal from Ian Porterfield the day after his birthday gave Sunderland a 3-0 win, which kept us in 5th place in the second tier. And on February the 12th, 2025, Enzo Lefebvre got his first Sunderland goal as we beat Luton 2-0 at the stadium. Like Wilson Isidore got the other one.
Do you reckon Porterfield dared to arrange a birthday party at his house to celebrate a birthday and celebrate scoring for the team?
Well, it'll be interesting whether he held his birthday party the night before the game or the night of the game, and whether Alan Brown got an invite.
I tell you, it was a stonking goal that he scored. I think, if memory serves me well, it was in the last minute or two of the game, and he scored a great goal. And two of my former schoolmates were playing that day for Sunderland. Yeah. Mick McGivern and Brian Chambers were both playing. They were a good bit older than me, but they went to the same school. I can remember that game. I was like a little peacock in the boys' enclosure there. Actually, I was in the full end that day, but I was like a peacock. Yeah, they went to my school. I know these two. I've never met them in
my mates. My mates.
Taught them everything they know in the playground.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you got to take credit when you can, get it, Kelvin. 13th of February 1946. Now this is an interesting one. This is obviously coming off the war leagues and the war years when the Football League was suspended. There's a chap called Cyril Brown played for us, and he played a number of games in the Football League North, which wasn't registered or it's not recorded as a proper competition, I guess, is it, in the record books. It's not recorded as league games. So officially, Cyril Brown only played 6 games for Sunderland. All of them, of course, in the FA Cup, because the FA Cup restarted whilst the War Leagues, the Football League North was going on. And he scored 5 goals in those 6 games before leaving the club. So he's made the most cup appearances without making a league game of any Sunderland player. Scored the most goals, I presume, with those games, but never played an official league match.
Nice one, Cyril.
Nice one, Cyril, indeed. It was probably around the same time, or a little bit later, wasn't it, with Cyril Knowles at Tottenham. 1988, Sunderland played Preston North End on their plastic pitch. Now, John McPhail and Eric Gates got our goals in a 2-2 draw. Steve Doyle got a red card and he was sent off. Brian Mooney, who would later join Sunderland, was among the Preston goal scorers. And you kind of think that maybe he came on Dennis Smith's radar during that game. And interestingly enough, Sam Allardyce was also in the Preston team alongside Brian Mooney that day. 1993, Sunderland beat Charlton Athletic away 1-0 with a Don Goodman penalty on 81 minutes. That's only a few days after that Oxford game. So the Oxford game that we talked about with Goodman scoring a penalty with Mike Ford getting sent off for Andy Melville's handball. That was a midweek game on Saturday. They went to Charlton, beaten 1-0 with another Don Goodman penalty on 81. And 6 years later, in 1999, Sunderland beat Bristol City away 1-0 with a Kevin Phillips penalty on 89 minutes. So the 13th of February is a day for getting a late winner from the penalty spot. 2016, this was a game that we played against Manchester United after Sam Allardyce had signed Lamine Kone, Wabi Kazri, Jan Kirchhoff and Darmé Ndoye in the January transfer window. Kazri and Kone's goal was a little bit disputed. I think some places gave it as a David De Gea own goal, but I think we'll claim that one for Lamine Kone as we beat Manchester United 2-1. That kind of set Allardyce's team on that roll, didn't it? Where we went on a great run of form. Actually, if you look at that period of time between the January and the end of the season, our form was good enough to be comfortably mid-table, if not a bit higher in the Premier League, which makes David Moyes' assertions that he inherited a poor side all the more rubbish. 2021, this was the Charlie Wyke game that Sunderland had against Doncaster, where Wyke scored 4 headers from 4 Aidan McGeady crosses in a 4-1 win. I think this was behind closed doors, wasn't it? It was during COVID. Lee Burge had an eventful game as well. He saved 2 penalties, but he also scored an own goal for Doncaster. February the 14th, 1948. Now, Len Shackleton is associated with Sunderland with a long and illustrious career, and you would expect things get off to a great start as soon as he signs. But similarly to Charlie Hurley, who didn't have the best of debuts, did he? Len Shackleton's debut ended in a 5-1 defeat at Derby County. Now, do either of you know who was on the score sheet for Derby that day?
Was Rich Carter?
Rich Carter got 4 of the 5 for Derby as we got turned over at the baseball ground. 1981, Sunderland played Leicester at Roker Park, beat them 1-0. Stan Cummins got the goal on that occasion. And in 2023, we played QPR away. This was a midweek game. Luke O'Nien scored the opening goal. I think he played in midfield, which was an unusual thing for him to do. And Jack Clark got 2 goals late on. Anthony Patterson saved a penalty from Ilias Chair to, I think, to keep it to 1-0. But yeah, we went on. And Jack Clark got 2 late-ish goals to make it 3-0 to Sunderland. Now, we're going to go back to February the 13th, Andrew, in 1985.
Yes. Well, a couple of things about the 13th of February, if I may just drop them in. You mentioned that famous win over Manchester United in the Allardyce season. I don't know if you remember, but it was a day before Valentine's Day, and for Manchester United, a certain Donald Love was making his debut, which quite interesting on a couple of points there. Also, the 13th of February 2002, we signed Patrick Mboma on loan. I don't know if you remember him, lads.
No.
Yes.
No.
Now, the only reason I want to mention him is because of that Saipan film I watched a couple of days ago. Do you reckon I could get the price back of the tickets? Could I claim for them on tax? Because I've said it's...
I reckon you could.
I've mentioned that film a couple of times now.
Kelvin and I think you got shares in the film, never mind anything else.
Yeah, I'm one of the producers. Mboma features very briefly in the film because he scores against Ireland in that World Cup in the fallout, so when Keane's back at home, and my daughter, she's invariably sick of me, but she was particularly sick of me at the cinema because I'm forever nudging her. Sunderland are never mentioned directly, but there are so many Sunderland links. Obviously, there's the whole McCarthy and Keane main story, but there was Mboma in there, so I gives her a nudge. Oh, he played for Sunderland. McAteer was in, so I give Ruby a nudge. Oh, he used to play for Sunderland, and she's like, yeah, I get it, Dad. Shay Given was in there. Kevin Kilban was in there. Niall Quinn, obviously. They did a fantastic job. Quite subtly, they never make a joke about it. They never reference it directly. But Niall Quinn, his clothes, man, they get his fashion down to a T. I mean, he was famous for his disco pants, but I remember this outfit he used to wear for playing golf in, and they got that perfectly in the film. So, there's my film review. Loads of Sunderland hints without Sunderland ever being mentioned in the film. But yes, anyway, thank you, lads. Back to 1985, and plenty of Sunderland references in this. It's the first leg of the Milk Cup semi-final against Chelsea, and we all know the story from the second leg at Stamford Bridge. I mean, that was infamous. So many stories and tidbits, if I may, from that leg. But the first leg at Roker Park, that was pretty tasty as well. It doesn't get as much attention, but it was a pretty wild night at Sunderland. Were you there, Kelvin? Were you at the game?
Yeah.
Well, get your alibi straight because there was all sorts of bother on the night. The Sunderland team, couple of names in here that I know Kelvin likes. Chris Turner in goal. Barry Venison, Gary Bennett, Gordon Chisholm and Nick Pickering are in defence. We've got Hodgson, Elliott, Berry and Walker in midfield. Peter Daniel starts, and so does Colin West. The unused substitute against Chelsea was Ian Wallace. Now, in the league that season, Chelsea did the double over us. The night of this semi-final game, it is freezing cold. The pitch is rock hard. So we do well in those circumstances, we do well considering it's a team who seem to have our number. Another thing to bear in mind that speaks well of how good Sunderland were on the night. Prior to kick-off, Gordon Chisholm and David Hodgson, they were both injury doubts. They played without being 100% fit. Clive Walker, he has to have a pain-killing injection before the game. So there's a few players who are not at their best fitness-wise, but Sunderland are so good on the night that Chris Turner, who in that competition, there's times where he single-handedly keeps Sunderland in games. In this particular evening, the players in front of him put such a shift in. He actually has quite a quiet night. There's not a lot for him to do, and certainly not a lot for him to do in comparison to other games in this run to Wembley. It's a full-blooded game, I think it's fair to say. You've got a Chelsea player called Joe McLaughlin. He collides with Colin West and has to go off because he's broken his arm. Paul Canaville, he's booked for throwing a punch at Barry Venison. There's all sorts happening, and this is just on the pitch, lads. I'll come to the scenes and the terraces afterwards. Dale Jasper is the lad who comes on for Joe McLaughlin when he breaks his arm, and bless him, he has a bad night. He gives away a penalty shortly after coming on for a really daft handball as a cross comes in from the clock stand side from David Hodgson, and he just sticks an arm out. It's a clear handball. Colin West takes the spot kick and absolutely blasts it in. He hits it right down the middle in front of the Roker end. It's packed behind him with Chelsea fans, making some lovely gestures, trying to attract his attention and try to put him off the penalty. But he blasts it in. It's brilliant. In the second half, Sunderland get even stronger. They build on that lead. They have a couple of decent chances, and then they get another penalty because Jasper, yet again, the lad, when the camera zooms in on him, you can see on his face, he doesn't know what's going on. He's shell-shocked. There's a long throw-in into the box. It bounces, and he just gets it all wrong. He misjudges the bounce of the ball. Colin West has turned him, and he just pulls Colin West down. As I say, Jasper just looks utterly bemused and perplexed by the whole thing. It's as if he's been dropped into this game and he never really got up to speed, bless him. Second penalty, Colin West again takes it. The goalkeeper is a lad called Eddie Nedvesky. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Nedvesky, yeah. He's a good goalie.
He was a decent keeper, and this time, Kelvin, he gets gloves onto the shot, but he's only able to put it onto the post, and the ball bounces out and just perfectly for West to score at the second attempt. So we go 2-0 up. We take that 2-0 advantage into the second leg, and that is crucial because it's like the Wild West at Stamford Bridge. We all know there's police horses on the pitch, there's riots, there's Sunderland fans being turned away, there's Sunderland fans being attacked inside the ground, outside the ground. But when you go back to the first game at Roker, there's hints towards all of that already. It's really peculiar watching footage of Roker Park, and there's fences all along the main stand paddocks. I think fences later get put up, certainly in front of the Fulwell end. I don't know if they ever get put up in front of the Roker and the clock stand, but certainly it's starting and they're running all along the side of the pitch there. Hooliganism and is rife at the time. There's all sorts of incidents around the game. It's the largest crowd of the season on Wearside. There's 32,500 there. But the club afterwards refer to having to deal with some of the worst damage they have ever seen at Roker Park.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the Sunderland fans, it's more the Chelsea fans causing a lot of the damage. There's scuffles in the ground, outside the ground, there's scuffles before kickoff, there's scuffles during the game. One of the major flashpoints that starts it all is the police try to arrest a Chelsea supporter who they've seen throwing a missile at the Sunderland fans. Obviously, the other Chelsea supporters around him don't take too kindly to his mate getting his collar felt. So it gets even more unruly. More objects start getting thrown at the Sunderland fans, including at the disabled section. That really seemed to upset people. Around 200 seats get ripped out during the melee. They get thrown towards Sunderland fans. So it's proper battle scenes at points. It's there's a bit of needle, and everybody likes a bit of backwards and forwards with the chanting and that. But this has gone well beyond that. And then the Blue Bell is targeted after the match. The Blue Bell's a famous Sunderland pub in Fulwell, and if Chris was with us on this pod, me and him could go into wistful memories of the Blue Bell because we both grew up near there. But on the night of the Chelsea game, it's involved in a lot of this chew. There's over 90 arrests made in total across the evening. The following day in the Echo, so that is the 14th of February, there is no love lost for Chelsea in the paper. They talk about the heavy police presence. They talk about thousands of pounds worth of damage being done, not just at the ground, but elsewhere. There's bars in town get smashed up. There's around 6,000 Chelsea supporters coming into the town, and a lot of them were on the rampage. It wasn't just Chelsea fans. Sunderland fans were involved in incidents as well. There's 5 police officers have to go to hospital for treatment. There's 2 Chelsea fans have fractured skulls. They obviously have to go to hospital. It's not a fun night for a lot of people. 2/3 of the supporters, 2/3 of the 96 that were arrested were from Chelsea. As I say, Sunderland weren't to blame. Chelsea weren't the only ones to blame. There was involvement from both sides. There's a quote here in the paper the next day. We had trouble before, during, and after the match, said a Northumbria police spokesman, and some trouble in the town centre. There was more trouble last night than at any other match this season. Now, this is a period when hooliganism is second nature. So for this game to be the worst they've seen all season, the police, that tells you the levels we're talking about. The article then goes on to this incident at the Blue Bell. It says, away from the ground, a coachload of drunken Chelsea supporters punched and kicked their way into the Blue Bell pub in Fulwell Road, hurling bottles, glasses, and even tables at terrified customers inside. Now, this bit about terrified customers, the Blue Bell back then had a bit of a reputation. The Seaburn casuals used to get in there in later years. So I'm pretty confident the locals will have given back as good as they got on that one. The Blue Bell is a much more refined establishment now, and, as I say, has customers like my good self and Chris in there. We would never be scrapping with opposition fans, but it did get pretty hairy in there on the night, and it was just one of many points where it all booted off. And just the mad thing about this, lads, this was the more serene of the two games. That just tells you everything you need to know about how mad it got down in London. And we've spoken about that game on the pod before. We might touch on it when we come to that point in the relevant On This Week episode. But Sunderland won 2-0 on the pitch, and there was all sorts happening off it that night as well.
Well, it can't be too long, can it, till the second leg comes round? It must be in the next week or two.
It was 19 days, apparently, which is quite long between two legs of a semi-final. I don't know why that was. So yeah, this was the starter course, and the main course is still to come in over a fortnight's time.
Do you have many memories of that night, Kelvin? Or are you taking the fifth?
A lot of memories. I thought we played really, really well. Andrew's right. Chris Turner, we definitely deserved the win. We were the best team on the night. Chelsea had some handy players in that team. You know, Pat Nevin, I always thought he was a really good player. I always liked Pat Nevin. Speedy. Was Kerry Dixon playing that night? I
think he was. From memory.
A memory of I always thought he was a good player. So they arrived sort of I think they were the favourites when they arrived, but we just were really, really good. It was a really good team performance. It's interesting you're talking about Barry Venison. You know, he's obviously one of our younger players, but he could stick the foot in Venice. You know, he had a hard edge about him, Barry Venison. And
well, he's from Stanley, wasn't
he? Yeah,
Stanley boy Barry Venison. It's no surprise. Yeah. No surprise.
Listen, Kelvin, you're telling us all the stories about what happened on the field of play. We can all dig out the highlights on YouTube. Martin and I aren't bothered about that. We want to know about the scraps you got into and whether you threw out any.
There was a big scrap outside the Roker end. And I think what it was, we came down. I can't remember how I got there that night. I think. Officer. Yeah. I think I'd come down from the borders in my car and had picked our young'un up, and I remember coming down the back of the Roker end. We used to go to a pub called the Lanercost House, and that was where we used to meet all our mates from Morpeth and that, you know, when I lived away in the Scottish borders. And I remember going in there, a couple of beers, came out. We hadn't really picked up any Stramash or anything. We're walking round the back of the Roker end, and quite often at night games, you weren't always as aware of who was around you. And I kind of realised, well, that's probably said, yeah, I was quite streetwise, you know, but I remember sort of chatting away, and then looking up at the back of the Roker end, and we were literally surrounded by Chelsea fans, you know, and would sort of just meandered into it in the dark, you know. And it did boot off, and it was somebody behind us. And, you know, it did boot off there. And the police, bear in mind as well, the police at that time, and they probably had good cause. I mean, they weren't shy. There were police with truncheons out, getting stuck in. It was pretty hairy. But Chelsea, whatever the rights and wrongs of it, I'm certainly not exonerating all Sunderland fans, because there was plenty of Sunderland fans involved at the back of the Roker end there when it booted off round there. But Chelsea were the firm with the biggest reputation at the time, and you know, they certainly came looking for trouble and got it. You know, it was disgraceful, really, because like all those things, and I mean, you lads will know as well as me, but quite often the people who got hurt, the people who got caught up in it, weren't necessarily hooligans looking for a scrap. It was fathers, sons. They were young'un with us, you know. I mean, just needed to get him out the road. He's 10 years younger than us. He's not going to be scrapping with any Chelsea fan. It's people get caught up in these things, and it's indiscriminate. I always say I had more respect for the crews that would arrange to meet. If you have to do it, go and meet somewhere, on a paddy field somewhere out the road of anybody else, and just get ripped into each other and sort it out that way. I'm not advocating that people should do that. I'm saying if you want to do that, why don't you just go somewhere and do it, and innocent folk don't get caught up in it. But it was a horrendous night. It was, and you're right about the press really got stuck in. They got stuck into Chelsea, the local press. But in all honesty, I would say to you, Andrew, we weren't blameless that night. There was Sunderland fans that were up for it and were getting stuck in as well, and it was a shameful night, really, in many respects. And it took the edge off our performance, because we did actually play really, really well that night. We took the game to them, and they never really got off first base. We were the rightful winners that night.
Well, I think, Kelvin, that the atmosphere around the ground perhaps contributed to the performance. You're saying we were rightful winners and we played well, but there were times when the players had to stand up and be involved in battles of their own, and they will have known what was happening. They will have heard the noise coming from the stand. So that's probably lifted the players as well. I think you're right. Chelsea had a bit of a reputation, and I'm like you. I'm not trying to put all of the blame on Chelsea. Chelsea had a reputation then. The north-south divide in the 80s was quite stark. It was quite apparent. And also, I've touched on this before in these pods, this is an era when the miners' strike's happening, and there's a lot of bad blood and a lot of very conflicting opinions. There's a lot of division in society then. So that's all added to the mood. You, Kelvin, though, have dropped yourself in it there, because the Lanercost, that was I thought I knew where that pub was. I've just checked in a book here. The Lanercost then became the Pilot Cutter and is now the Harbour View. And if I'm going to give an advert for the Bluebell and say that's a nice venue these days, the Harbour View is as well. The Harbour View's a cracking pub, and I think people still go there before Stadium of Light matches. However, in between the Harbour View pub and the Roker end is the back lane for Bede Street, and a dirty great big field that used to be train lines that led towards the docks.
I know
now,
that.
You're telling me you used to have respect for these lads who used to meet up on a field and just settle it away from the punters. Now that field, to me, feels like a perfect venue if you wanted to have a bit of a Royal Rumble before the game. So was that you, Kelvin, a quick drink in the Lanercost and then jump outside and go into the field and
No, you've got it. It wasn't me, officer. It wasn't me, officer. Yeah. You know how much I like a big lanky cockney. Can never resist a tall back, Andrew.
Well, there you
Especially
go.
a cockney one.
There's another tidbit for you to end this little deep dive on.
Indeed it is. And I think as Kelvin goes and makes a call to his legal representative, we will take a very short break. We'll be back after an ad or two. Welcome back to Haway The Podcast. Kelvin has got the all clear to keep talking about Sunderland versus Chelsea, which we might do in a week or two's time. But for now, we are going to go back to 1913. And we talked at the top of the pod about a game in 1912 where Jackie Mordew and George Holly were called up for England. It was the first time that two Sunderland players had been called up to represent England in the game. That was a game against Ireland in Dublin. A year after, so 1913, on February the 15th, this was the first time that three players from Sunderland have been called up for England. and it's the only time as well. So Charlie Buchan, Jackie Mordew and Frank Cuggy all played for England in this game. This was against Ireland in Belfast this time. George Holley had played in the previous 3 international games but had been dropped for this one, so it could have actually been 4. And of course, Sunderland still had a game to play without these 3 players playing. We actually beat Middlesbrough at Ayresome Park on the same day, 2-0. Harry Martin and Jimmy Richardson got the goals. So it's quite, obviously, it was just the timing of it. They obviously had international matches scheduled at this time of year at that time. But yeah, 1 year apart, almost to the day. We had 2 England internationals from Sunderland, and then a year later we had 3. 1913, continuing the England theme, especially for Kelvin. 1930, Ernie England, fullback, played his last game for us. So in total, Ernie England played 352 games, never scored a goal for the club. I think we mentioned it last week very briefly. This game was against Forest. Adam McLean and Gordon Gunson had put us 2-0 up, but a chap called Billy Dickinson got 2 goals in the last 20 minutes for Forest to draw the game 2-2. Now, Ernie England went on to have a brief spell at West Ham before he joined Mansfield and played 130 games for Mansfield, and he did score on 3 occasions for Mansfield during his time there. 1964, there was almost 63,000 supporters at Roker Park to see Sunderland play Everton, going 3-0 up and eventually winning 3-1. This set up the classic series of FA Cup games, Kelvin, against Man U. On this occasion against Everton, Jimmy McNabb, Charlie Hurley and an own goal gave us victory.
Everybody talks about that Man U tie, and it was a big occasion. Everton were the league champions, when we beat them 3-1. That's some performance. That's an amazing result for us,
isn't it?
And that was that 63-64 team that I was talking about earlier that took Everton to the cleaners that year. That was the team that played that night was the team that all the fans that watched the 63-64 could, the way that we can with the 1973 team, we just threw out those names, Monty Ashurst, Irwin, Harvey, Hurley, McNabb, Usher, Hurd, Sharkey, Crossan and Mulhall.
There you go.
Well done.
Very good. Almost 30 years later, 28 years later, Sunderland run the trail of Wembley once again, 1992 FA Cup run. And on the 15th of February in 92, we played West Ham at Roker Park. I think this was the 5th round game, wasn't it? Because we played Oxford in that game that we talked about last week, away at the Manor Ground. West Ham were top flight at the time, and we drew 1-1 with them. John Byrne scored a scrappy equaliser from memory. I think it was a very windy game, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Mike Small had given West Ham the lead in the second half. With John Byrne equalised, we took them back to Upton Park. And I'm sure we'll talk about the replay at Upton Park in a little bit more detail in a week or two's time. 2014 is another FA Cup game, this time against Southampton at the Stadium of Light. This one we won 1-0 with Craig Gardner scoring a goal. And Nacho Scotcho made his debut on that occasion, another famous name in Sunderland history. And in 2015, a year later, George Honeyman made his debut for the club, coming on as a sub against Bradford at Valley Parade. This was a game that we got beat in. From memory, I think Phil Parkinson was the Bradford manager.
Mm-hmm.
But we got beat down at Valley Parade. But yes, George Honeyman made his debut for the club.
Fine player, George Honeyman.
He was. And it's funny. It's a funny one with George Honeyman because he got his opportunities because of the situation the club was in. But also that situation the club was in didn't actually help him at all. There was an awful lot of weight in his shoulders, wasn't there? But no, he's gone on to have a pretty good championship career, hasn't he? He's done well since leaving the club. And again, I'll go off a complete tangent with this, but Honeyman is symptomatic of the way that we dealt with young players at that time. Because from memory, he was maybe 22 when he made his debut.
Yeah.
And you looked at as a young, inexperienced player. Now, if you look at somebody like Chris Rigg, by the time he gets to 22, Eliza Mayenda, by the time he gets to 22, they're going to have 3 figures worth of games under the belt, aren't there? So I don't think we did him any favours really keeping them. I think he's gone on to Gateshead, and that was it.
Yeah,
I don't think he played.
There'd been a lot of Gateshead. There'd been a lot.
So yeah,
and the weight that was on his shoulders, the expectations that of him, I really felt you're right. You're dead right. I totally agree with you. There was no reasonable progression for young players at that time. Thank God it's different. It's different now.
It was all firefighting, wasn't it? It was all desperately trying to stay up at whatever cost that was to the club. And we saw that in managerial appointments. We saw that in transfers.
Yeah.
We saw that like this with young players not being given a chance. You look at players like John Egan, again, who went on to have a great career, Conor Hourihan a little bit earlier. All players who had excellent careers, but we didn't give a chance to.
With Honeyman, he did have a chance for us eventually. He became our captain, and yet we still sold him. Like, I think we sold him for a few $100,000. So relatively speaking, it wasn't a lot of money. He was devastated to leave Sunderland. So there was a player who wasn't just a youth prospect. There was a player who'd got himself into the first team, would work his socks off every single week, and yet we get an offer for what is, in footballing terms, peanuts. And again, the ownership just see the pound signs and sell him when really he was one of the heartbeats of the team. Yeah. So very unfortunate George Honeyman, and I feel for him because he was at the club a long time. He was at the club as a kid, and he was a clever player. He was a grafter. For various reasons, he didn't get great treatment from the club.
Well, it was at the time where the club were just taking any money that could get from anybody for anyone. Any offer that came on the table was deemed to accept. So,
very short-sighted.
Very short-sighted indeed. On that very cheery and positive note, that wraps today's show up. Andrew, do you have a quiz question for people to ponder as they meander through the week?
Cheers. Yes. We will be talking 16th of Feb to the 22nd of Feb next time. And we will be talking 18th of February. In 1930, on that date, we went to Nottingham Forest in the FA Cup. February is a time for FA Cup ties, isn't it? We're always in FA Cup action if we've been good enough to hang on past the first couple of rounds. So we go to Nottingham Forest in 1930 in a 5th round replay, and we are wearing a very unusual shirt that day. So if anybody knows that shirt, please get in touch and describe it for us, please.
It's one for the fashionistas out there. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much, Kelvin. Always a pleasure, mate.
Thank you. Enjoyed that.
And thank you to Barry Norman, who joined us today as well.
I thought you meant Calvin. I thought you meant Calvin Palmer for a second there, not me.
No, Tony's brother. We will be back next week with another episode of On This Week, and of course we'll be back tomorrow on Haway The Podcast with your daily Sunderland update. And there'll be tons of stuff over at rokerreport.sbnation.com as well. But until next time, it's goodbye from us.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Carvana's so easy. Just a click and we've got ourselves a car. See?
So many cars. That's a click-tastic inventory.
And check out the financing options. Payments to fit our budget. I mean, that's
Clickonomics 101.
delivery to our door.
Just a hop, skip, and a click away.
And what?
No better feeling than when everything just clicks.
Clicks.
Buy your car today on
Carvana.
Delivery fees may apply.